over the years, people would say, gosh, this is such hard work. You guys sweat blood to get these patients through. But it's worth every single gram of effort that we put in sometimes. And what's, for example, I'll give you a story. Every single patient that I operate on, I think is amazing. And they, as I said, they have their own story to tell. But what is amazing, that was looming in my horizon, is that on the 22nd of November 1982, which obviously was a long time ago, a young lady came in and had a heart transplant by Sir Terence English. She was 28 at the time. And in those days, that was only 3 years after the first successful heart transplant in the UK. So she was in the very early phase of the program. And in those days, no one would have sort of dreamt that you could do this and people could survive for 10 years. In those days, you're lucky to survive 3 or 4 years after heart transplants. So that was 1982, very early. But she did well, and she carried on living until 2003, 2004. So her heart then started to fail. So this was 23 years after her original heart transplant. Her heart was failing. And in most cases, we would say, okay, your heart is failing, you're getting a bit old, other things are happening, like your kidneys are not working well, you have diabetes and other things. So usually, most people will say, okay, you've had a pretty good innings after your heart transplant. 23 years, that's already beaten the odds. They would then be left to palliative care. But this lady was still very fit and well otherwise. So even though it was 20-odd years after her heart transplant, she was still very fit and well. And so, rather unusually, we accepted her for a retransplant. And she was very lucky. We found a donor heart for her. And I did a second heart transplant on her in 2005. And it was a very difficult operation. A repeat heart transplant is very tricky. But we did all right, and she recovered. And actually, she recovered very well and went back to a very normal, active life. And that was 2005. And fast forward to today, she remains alive and well. And so, 22nd of November, which is 2 weeks away, will be the 40th anniversary since her original heart transplant when she was 28. So she's now 68. We've more than doubled her lifespan. She's now had 40 years of life that she wouldn't have had. And so this is a huge milestone for us, and of course for her and her family. And what's incredible and amazing is that the first thing she said to us recently was that I'd love to meet my surgeons again. And I contacted Sir Terence English, who is now 90 years old. And I spoke to him and I said, do you remember Sandra Law? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, you did a heart transplant back in 1982. And she's going to have her 40th anniversary. She said she would love to see you. He said, I'm going to come and see her. And so I'm arranging to have this fantastic reunion to celebrate the 40th anniversary of her transplant in 2 weeks' time. And this is going to be a record. And so she's exceptionally lucky. As I said, I feel really privileged to be part of her journey and played a part in it. Because to think that, I had my hand in this whole process so that she can now come back and say hello to Sir Terence English. It's very, very touching and very heartwarming. And as I said, these are the rewards that we get. That I think it's hard for people to imagine what it means to us. And that's when, all the hard work pays off, because, the sleepless nights, the, missing important family events and all those things, suddenly the arguments, the fights at home, why weren't you home? Why do you have to be in hospital all the time? All of those things just vanish. You just look at it and say, it's been worth it. These are really, really tough decisions, because I think unless you are put in that position, we talk to patients, we're very direct with them, because it is life or death. It is weighing it up and say, okay, if we don't do something, you are alive today, you're alive tomorrow, but chances are you won't be alive in a year or 2 years' time. So we have to take this plunge sometime. And it is an enormous leap of faith to be told that you may not come through this alive. You may, take you through this journey of waiting and bring you in for heart transplant, but you may not actually leave hospital alive. This may be the last time you're leaving your home and your family, and you're saying goodbye to everything. And so it is an enormous decision. It's really tough, and sometimes, yes, people are scared. But at the end of the day, they do have to put their trust in someone. And whether it's nowadays, it's a bit easier because people can do their own research. People can say, often my patients would say, oh, yes, we'll look you up on the internet, we know who you are, we know what you do. But in those days, you just have to take people to work for it, isn't it? And it's a blind trust. It's not like you can be analytical and say, yes, I've compared everything, and yes, you are the best, and we trust you. It's not that. You just have to take people's word for it. This doctor referred him to his local hospital, his local hospital referred him to us, and then I just happen to be working here. I happen to be on duty on the night when the heart comes up, and he has to come in and just quietly accept that this is my fate, this is going to happen, and this chap that I don't know from Adam is going to rip me apart. There are lots of things that we are working on with heart transplantation. If we look at for example, how long do people survive on average after heart transplant? And we look at people who have had heart transplants in the 80s, compared to the ones who've had it in the 90s, and compared to the ones who've had it in the noughties, and then in the last 10 years. And you can draw what's called survival curves. What percentage are alive at 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. It's not going to be 100% all the way through. As I said, we lose 5% at the beginning, and every year we lose a few more. So that percentage drops as time goes on. But if we look at each of the survival curves for each decade, that survival curve has gone up, gone up, and gone up. So for each decade that people have their heart transplant, their survival has been increasing. So originally, 50% of people may be alive after 10 years. And then the next decade, 50% of people are alive after 12 years. And then fast forward to now, what we are expecting to see is that 50% of people will be alive after 15 years. So that's a gain in survival, and that's through a lot of changes, incremental improvements in how we do the operation, how we treat what immunosuppressive drugs we use, how we treat rejection, how we treat infections, and so on. The Achilles heel of transplantation is shortage of organs. And this is why people have to wait a long time. And this is where, as I said, sometimes people deteriorate and die before they get a donor heart. So a very big drive that we have had is to try and increase the number of donor hearts available for transplant. And this is working hand in hand with the UK transplant authorities. And there are multiple, sort of multi-pronged approach to try and increase the number of organs available for transplant. The donor consent rate has historically been low in this country. We found that when people die, you approach the next of kin and ask them, would you agree to organ donation? Surveys were done, and when we look at it, statistically, up to 40% of families say no. And it's understandable because they're in grief, they're in shock, and they just don't want to do something that they're going to regret. And for most lay people who've not really thought about it, they think this is very intrusive, and their poor husband, wife, son, daughter has already died, and you want to go and rip out their organs. So for most general public who hasn't really thought through the logic and rationale and so on, when they're in grief and shock, they just say, just leave us alone, thank you, no thank you. And so organ donation consent rate was quite low. So public education is really important, and it's something that everyone should be thinking about and talking about it with their family. No one likes talking about death, but this is the only way we're going to change attitude, is that when people see the benefit of organ transplantation, and it could happen to anybody. You know, obviously you have first-hand experience of it, but 99% of the population don't have that experience, and they don't even think about it. But it's to educate them, to make them realize that actually once we die, and what do we want to leave behind on this earth? You know, of course people want to leave good memories, leave their reputation intact. Sometimes people want to leave their legacy, donate, whatever, and so on. And I often say to people that, tell me, you know, what are your most treasured belongings? And some people might say, well, it's this gold watch that my grandfather gave to me, or this Picasso on my wall, or this vintage Ferrari in my garage. So I said, okay, fine, those three are your three most treasured belongings. What do you want to do with them when you die? Well, I want to donate that Picasso to the museum. I want my son to have this watch, and I go to whatever. So I say, okay, that's fine. What if I tell you, no, we're not going to do that when you die? I'm just going to set these things on fire or bury them, dig a hole and bury them in the ground. How would you feel about it? Well, that's criminal. You know, how could you do that to my most treasured belongings? Well, what is more valuable and treasured than your vital organs, your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, that's kept you alive and well and allow you to enjoy your life? And potentially these things could allow many other people who would otherwise die to have a new lease of life and enjoy their life. Don't you think these are more valuable than your Rolex and your Picasso and Ferrari? No. But then you are saying you don't care about those things. Well, just let them cremate or bury them and let them rot. So where's the logic of that? You know, you want someone to have your Ferrari and gold watch and so on because they're going to do something good. It's going to give people some pleasure and memory and so on. Imagine, your organs going to people, not only to give them pleasure, but to give them life. You're going to be remembered forever by these people and their circle of friends and family forever. That legacy is going to be many-fold magnitude compared to you leaving your gold watch and so on, isn't it? And these are the sort of conversations that people need to have in the cold light of day and think it through. And, if the penny dropped and they realize that those organs are useless to them when they die and they're just going to rot in the ground or get incinerated, then hopefully most people will see the value and logic of saying that I want to donate my organs when I die. I don't want to leave them to rot. And so if people have these active discussions with their family, and if that's what your mom and dad, your sister, brother, or whatever told you when they die, if they die and they become suitable organ donors, and someone come and approach you, you say, oh yes, I remember Johnny told me that's what he wanted, and we're going to respect that. So having public education to have these discussions and debates within family is really important. And so we've come a long way in the UK in increasing the consent rate for organ donation. And a few years ago, there was a change in law, which should help, although personally, I think the British public in general can be quite rebellious if you impose something that they don't agree with. So I think simply changing the law isn't going to change the situation. It is persuading people to see the sense and value of it. That's going to change behavior. I think the law is facilitative, is not something that we can impose on people. But there are other things, medically speaking, that we can do to try and increase the number of organs that we use. For example, it's hard enough to get an organ, but donor hearts is so crucial. As I said, if we don't get it right, people die on the operating table. So we are very careful in assessing donor hearts, and currently we only use about 27% of hearts that are donated, because the other ones have been so injured that we worry that if we take them and transplant them, they're not going to work and the recipient will die. I don't want to double the number of heart transplants that we do, but lose half the recipients, obviously. So we need to work on how to support and nurse these injured hearts to make more of them work after we transplant, so that we can take weaker hearts and still transplant them successfully. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in those areas that to try and increase the number of heart transplants that we can do to benefit more people and to increase the survival after transplant, improve the outcomes. I see how well people do, and it's odd that sometimes my patients will say, oh, I haven't seen you for ages, and I usually tell them that actually that's a good thing, because I don't want you to be seeing me all the time, and usually I see people who run into problems a lot, and the patients who are sort of etched in my brain are the ones that I am agonizing what to do next, and because they run into lots of problems and it's been really challenging and tricky to get them through. Those are ones that I see a lot of, and I as I said, etched in my memory. So if people don't see a lot of me, it's actually a good thing. They don't need my attention, which is good. But it's not like I want to hold people to sort of. Yeah, I'm only one cog in a very big wheel, and I don't see myself as any more special than any other cog in that wheel. It's part of the team. And okay, it's a very defined event, and of course without that nothing else could happen. But then for your dad, who's done well for the last 17 years, clearly the whole team has been closely involved in fine-tuning his medications, doing his biopsies and checking on everything to keep a close eye. And I can't do a one-man show and do everything. And I do what I'm best doing, which is that bit which is challenging. Triaging and accepting and deciding on which organ to use and doing the operation, that is challenging. But then, once that's done, that's done.
Thank you for meeting me.
It's a pleasure. Great to meet you.
It's amazing to meet you. Yeah.
Pass on my best wishes to
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely will. Yeah.